Hello, I'm Dan James, Head of Corporate Finance at Wilson Partners, and here today with my colleagues Philip Atkinson and Ed Macpherson to talk M&A. But before we do that, I just wanted to touch on what corporate finance means to us. Corporate finance is quite a broad term, and I'm aware that for people not working within the corporate finance arena, there might be a lack of understanding as to what it means or what it is that we do. So corporate finance for us is a service department within our business, and underlying that are a number of other core services that we provide to clients. Firstly, it's M&A, mergers and acquisitions, sometimes known as lead advisory. And that's where we'd be advising sellers on how they maximise the value that they've built in their business and then assisting them to go and do just that. Or it might be advising buyers where they're looking at making acquisitions or investments. The second is TS, or transaction services, transaction support, otherwise known as due diligence. And that's typically where we're advising buyers, sometimes sellers, with financial and tax due diligence reports in support of a transaction or an investment. And then we have valuations, and there might be a number of instances where we're asked to provide a valuation. Could be valuing shares for an incoming management team member, could be setting a hurdle rate for a growth share scheme, could be an EMI scheme, could be valuing a private equity portfolio asset, or it could be for a divorce. But as mentioned, here to talk about M&A today, and without further ado, I'd like to pass over to Philip. If you'd like to introduce yourself, Philip.
I'm Philip Atkinson. I lead the M&A service line here at Wilson Partners. I've been involved in M&A for over 30 years, both in professional practice and industry.
Thank you, Philip. Ed?
And I'm Ed Macpherson. I've been working the corporate finance team here at Wilson Partners for about 3 years now, and I've split my time between lead advisory with Philip and the due diligence side as well.
Excellent. Thank you. So we're going to go through a few questions to have a discussion around some of the core areas that sit within the M&A ecosystem and draw out some of the key talking points that hopefully people will be interested to hear. And I'm going to start by saying that we deal generally with SMEs, so owner-managers and entrepreneurs that typically have not been, not always, it's a generalisation, but typically have not been through a transaction or a sale process before. So many of those will be sat there thinking, how do I realise the value that I've built within this business? All the blood, sweat and tears. I'm now at a point where either someone else needs to take it on to the next stage, or I want to retire, or I've just had enough and I want to get out. So the first question is, what are the typical routes to selling a business, and how can we explain those to potential vendors and sellers?
You're quite right. Typically for most entrepreneurs, it's a once-in-a-lifetime event. At the most basic level, there's DIY, do it yourself. This is probably more suitable for small and micro businesses, perhaps unincorporated businesses. They can use trade magazines. There's websites you can put your business for sale on, things like Dalton's Weekly, etc., and handle the situation yourself. You're probably still likely to need some legal advice, possibly to deal with any employment issues, and certainly if you're selling shares, you'll need a lawyer to help draft a sale and purchase agreement. Next up would be business transfer agents and business brokers. Typically they work at the smaller end of the market, so sub £2 million deals. Their approach to marketing tends to be a bit of a scattergun. They will draft perhaps an information memorandum. Support post starting the transaction might be limited. The vendor might sometimes be left very much to negotiate and handle this, ultimately the end of the sale process on their own. Next up would be specialist agents. Certainly if you've got a property-backed business, you might be looking to one of the larger estate agency businesses to help you sell a hospitality business, pubs, clubs, hotels, businesses such as increasingly solar-based assets are moving into that sector as well, and also things like healthcare, nursing homes. If you're a franchisee, you might want to speak to the franchisor. Often they have a waiting list for very popular franchises where they're pre-vetted potential franchisees. That might save you some time negotiating with a party which subsequently isn't acceptable to the franchisor. At the top end of the scale then, so corporate finance and investment banks, typically handling sales over 2 million up to many millions. At this end of the market, you're getting the advisor will invest many hours into preparing an information memorandum, undertaking buyer research, looking for strategic purchasers to buy that business. They will handle the exchange of confidentiality agreements and project manage the whole process through for you. You're likely to get a wraparound service that covers all the aspects that you're going to need, such as tax advice, legal advice will be provided by the lawyers.
Excellent, thank you. And just to be, for the avoidance of any doubt, where do Wilson Partners and our services sit within that ecosystem?
We're very much advisors to the vendors, so we'll undertake or assist with the drafting of the information memorandum. We'll assist with the buyer research, so that's a very collaborative process. Working with the vendors who understand their industry business better than we are, but we have access to various databases and things like that, so we can help them there. We will handle the issue of the initial contact with the purchasers, handle the issue of the information memorandum, help management with management presentations, help them assess indicative bids, and then project manage their other advisors through to completion.
Lovely, thanks. I just wanted to pick up on one term that we used there. It's obviously very familiar to us, an IM, which is either an investment memorandum or an information memorandum. But for those that don't know, what is an information memorandum?
That's very much the marketing tool that we use. It's a document which is factually correct, but it presents the business as a investment opportunity to an acquirer.
And so those are the routes of who you choose, or which route you choose to get your business to market. But if I'm sat here as a seller, what are my options? Obviously, I can presumably sell to a competitor, a trade competitor. If I've got a management team, but there's no money behind them, are there ways that I can get my business to market still?
There are. So you mentioned management team and lack of funding. If you have a strong management team who can step in and fill that gap if you leave, they can attract funding from private equity houses, and banks, etc. will provide debt finance to them as well. So there's very much an exit route for them. And selling to management, it can be quite an attractive option. They know the business, and sometimes vendors take the view that they would like to sell to management to reward them for all the hard work that they put into the business over the years.
And obviously, as we know, the private equity landscape is vast. There are obviously varying different funds at different sizes, some with sector expertise, some that are more sector agnostic, some that will absolutely go and find their own management teams to bring in, some that will only back existing management teams. So there's a whole array of options there. I think it's worth drawing out that just because the management team, I mean, ideally you'd have a management team that would put some skin in the game, for want of a better phrase, so that an equity backer can have that comfort that there's some buy-in there. But there are options where there's not money readily available to buy out
they might
vendor.
take out personal loans or something like that, and even agreeing deferred terms with the vendor and paying off that over time. He steps into the shoes of bridging that gap, if you like, between what finance is available to the management team to buy the business and what the ultimate price has been agreed at.
And I guess the other route that we haven't touched on there, so we've got a trade sale potentially, we've got a management buyout potentially, or if either of those don't work or are not favourable for whatever reason, there's the EOT route, which is becoming more popular.
Indeed, increasingly popular, and that's I suppose characteristics a bit like a management buyout, but the business is sold to a trust company that attracts funding in, if possible, and the vendor is paid out over time. To get the tax breaks, you have to sell at least 51% of the equity.
Just to explain the acronym, EOT, Employee Ownership Trust, and you mentioned the trust element there. Generally slightly lower value, but particularly where there's a lot of sentiment through the employee base that have maybe will have helped that vendor to grow the business to what it is, and paying some of that faith back by allowing them to go on, take some ownership in the business themselves.
Indeed, and sometimes the slightly lower value is offset by the tax break, because at the moment, under current tax legislation, it's tax-free.
Yeah, Great. So as a vendor, I've decided which route I want to go down. I've identified how I need to be advised. The next stage then is, how do I determine what my business is worth? What value do I set in my mind when I'm going to market as to what's acceptable for me, what's realistic for me, make sure I'm not taking less than my business is worth or putting it under a structure that makes it less than it might be worth. What are the options there in terms of valuing a business?
Yeah, so most of the valuations that we see are based on the market approach. So that's where we'll look at similar businesses that have been sold and understand the deal metrics there. So here at Wilson Partners, we've got loads of subscription databases where we can look all over the world in terms of similar businesses that have been sold to understand how much they've been sold for. Once we've understood the value, we'll then make some adjustments to that value depending on details that we know about the vendor. So for instance, the quality of the management team, the supplier concentration, customer concentration, and whether or not those customers have got contracts in place. Another thing that we'd consider is the exposure that company's got to sort of political and legal, the political and legal environment. For instance, the more a business is reliant on individual customers or big customers, that would probably lower the value of the business. If they've got a really high quality management team, then we'd probably see an upward adjustment of that value.
Great, that's useful, and that's what we'd refer to as kind of value levers or value drivers, and you can use the data that's out there to benchmark what's happening within a particular sector or a particular market, but then we would look specifically at a company to say, these are the things that tick that value up, and these are the things maybe that tick that value down, to try and to make an informed view of what the value might be for that specific company. But I guess ultimately a business is worth what someone's willing to pay for it, but you want to have that baseline of data to at least get a ballpark of where you think it's going to land. And then obviously if you get offers that are above that, there might be some strategic rationale that drive that, which you're only potentially going to have with one particular buyer, or it might just not be suitable for a particular route. And so the only way you can go is trying to go for a lower value exit to get some value. So there's lots of different things that play into that. And I think one of the challenges that we see is often, we talked about the kind of owner-managers, entrepreneurs that have never been through a process like this. It's their transaction of a lifetime, and a lot of what they have in their mind is chatting to their mates down the pub, seeing glorified articles in the press, unicorn companies, this company went for this time, and it's trying to realign those expectations with the kind of reality that we see in the data. And there's lots of different things that play into that, many of which you've just described, but also scale is a big one. Generally a business that's large attracts an arbitrage on a multiple because it's got the infrastructure and the professionalisation that de-risks it more to a greater extent than the smaller owner-managed businesses that are still on a journey.
Indeed, and I suppose if they've got things like specialist technology in there and things like that, can make them much more attractive if they're innovative at the forefront of the market. They may be a small company, but they may have already got some IP, intellectual property asset within their company that makes them a very attractive target, and people are prepared to pay a strategic premium for that.
Okay, great. So we've established we want to sell a business. We've established what the best route is likely to be. We've set a broad expectation of what value might look like. What does a typical process look like from that point forward?
Ideally, an advisor would be coming in to a vendor 2 to 3 years before that actual planned exit. The main reason for that is to start setting up that company to maximise the value that they're going to be able to achieve when they do finally exit. So for instance, they might want to clean up their finances, get them neat and tidy for when they send that to potential buyers. They also probably want to think about getting a suitable management team in place to take the business on in that next phase of the journey there. Another thing they probably want to consider is looking at getting a financial model in place, because any potential buyer is going to want to see where the management team or the vendor believes that business can get to in the sort of 2 to 3 to maybe even 5 years after that. Yep. So that'd be the first case. So it starts about 2 to 3 years before that planned exit, which might seem like a long time, but actually when you take into account that selling a business usually takes sort of up to 6 months, that time quickly goes away.
That's an important part to touch on, I think, in that, and we see it a lot. If we're able to start working with a business 18 months, 2 years before a planned event, I mean, that's the holy grail for us. It doesn't happen as often as it should. And understandably for small businesses, that investment in time and potentially in cost leading up to that transaction, which still feels quite a long way away, is a hard thing to do. And actually very few vendors, owner managers kind of have the foresight to say, this is what I need to do, and can see the benefit through the sale process of the extra value that will create.
Yeah, I think start those conversations early, and your advisor will help you reach a decision as to which of those investments is probably the best to make and should be made quickly. One of Ed mentioned, strengthening the management team. If you want a very quick exit and be able to leave the business quickly, perhaps having the management team in place and then able to demonstrate that they can run that business without you is a strong message to send to a potential buyer. It also opens up an option of selling to the management team, which we discussed earlier.
Yeah, and it's all ultimately opening more doors, but also de-risking when you get to the position of hitting the button of going to market and trying to get something done. Not always the way it works. So quite often we'll get people come to the table that will say, I'm ready to sell. What do I do? How do I go about it? And we can still deliver a service in that instance, and we'll fundamentally do the same things. We'll sense check the quality of the business and the reporting and the management team. And we'll advise how we get that in shape as quickly as possible, or whether we need time before going to market to have the best chance of getting a deal that meets expectations. So we've done all the preparation for sale, however long we get to do that, then what happens?
So at this stage, a business would be ready to be marketed at this. So you'll be working with the vendor at this point to pull together an information memorandum, which would be a sort of slick marketing document that you'd send to potential buyers. Once you've sent it to potential buyers, you hopefully be getting a fair amount of interest in your business, and we'd invite selected buyers in to meet the management team, where they can ask questions and get to know the management team a little better from that point. After that, you'd be hoping to get some offers in place, which can sometimes be relatively confusing to a vendor because they'd be in different structures, there'd be different value. And this is where an advisor would help to explain key terms that have been made.
Yeah, it's an interesting point to touch on, because you get generally a headline value that comes back from a number of different parties, but actually the structure is hugely important as to what that means for the vendors and the risk profile that sits around them. So there's a vast difference between 10 million cash out on day one and 2 million cash out on day one, 5 million deferred and 3 million on earn out, both in terms of timing of the payment, but also risk around the payment. Same headline value of 10 million, but very different outcomes. Yeah,
typically, it's a technique used by a buy-side advisor who's trying to protect his client and optimise the terms that that client buys the business on. And
can be a technique or a strategy for a higher valuation. So if someone wants to put themselves at the front of the queue in a bidding process, they could potentially get themselves to a higher value if they structure some of that further out. And then it's about the kind of risk appetite of the vendors and what they're trying to achieve. Are they looking for a clean break and out as quickly as possible, or actually they're quite happy continuing to work with the new majority shareholder? Might not be majority, but a new majority shareholder to drive it for the next few years and then take some value further down the line with confidence that you can deliver a plan that gets greater overall value, but obviously not without risk.
And we're increasingly seeing that vendors are staying with the business post-deal.
Yeah. So the process, it's a kind of how long is a piece of string question. How long typically do they last? I know the kind of general market environment plays a factor in it, complexity too, but what do we typically see in the deals that we do? How long do they last?
So typically they'd last between probably 4 and 6 months. Some can go on for longer, some can be quicker, but it kind of depends on what's been found during due diligence, for example, the length of time it takes to negotiate. But yeah, that is usually between sort of 4 and 6 months.
And I think one of the key factors in that, and again touched on the fact that we largely deal with SMEs and owner managers who are not necessarily under-resourced, but are lean in terms of the structure. These processes can be very onerous. Obviously, you're working towards a greater goal and everybody's invested in doing it, but it takes management focus away from running the business. So certainly what I've seen in the past is a lot of instances where some of the trading starts to drop off because it just doesn't have the focus that it normally gets, and that can delay things.
Indeed, and that's again one of the shortcomings of trying to go it alone and manage this. If you decided not to appoint an advisor, selling a business is time consuming, and as you say, it takes you away from the day-to-day management, and you might see trading fall down, which has implications. You might find out the price is then renegotiated, the acquirer delays the process or even withdraws.
And we'll come back to the benefits of an advisor there, but yeah, one of that is to take the pressure off managing the process. But also internally, I think there's a value to, there's a balance of sensitivity within an environment, maybe an owner not wanting all the employees to know that he's going to sell, doesn't want to disrupt, whether it's culture, whether it's productivity, or people starting to leave because they get nervous or uncertain about what's coming, to having a core group of kind of trusted people around you that can just help share some of that burden.
Absolutely, I think that's key, because delay is an enemy of a deal process to a certain extent. The longer it goes on, you're sending out a message to a potential buyer that you're perhaps not ready, or your systems aren't up to standard to give the quality of information they need. Again, that's where it comes back to preparation at the beginning. That period where we say, we need 2 to 3 years, we're looking at your financial systems, we're making sure that they're dependable, can produce reliable financial information, doing a lot of the work before we go to market.
And that's all kind of specific stuff in deal. You've also then got kind of global macroeconomic environment where things seem to be changing and coming up so quickly that can impact supply chain, can impact tax rates, that could just change the dynamics of a deal without much warning. So
Indeed.
Speed is of the essence.
It is.
Great. So I wanted to talk a bit around kind of the different types of engagement. So we're talking mainly around advising sellers, which from our M&A team is largely what we do. It's advising our clients and clients that have come through our introducer network that are looking to sell. But we also do some work with buy-side advisory engagements, which is generally working with private equity or corporates on a buy and build. But just wanted to understand the difference in dynamics between what we'd call a sell-side engagement and what we call a buy-side engagement.
Okay, so typically buy-side, as you say, appointed by either acquisitive corporates or private equity houses, and we help them search and identify potential strategic acquisitions that meets their acquisition strategy. A number of ways that we would work with them is obviously the ultimate goal is for them to buy the target company at the best price they can, but get a successful deal. And that's looking at reducing any competitive tension. If there's a sell side advisor that's trying to run a structured process, we'd be looking to put in place exclusivity agreements as soon as we can and for a long period of time to take some of that pressure away. So limiting competition there. We're looking, as we mentioned, at optimising the offer structure to minimise the risk to our clients, so the use of earnouts and deferred consideration and things like that. So that's some of the techniques that you would see a buy-side advisor doing. Conversely, a sell-side advisor is going to be trying to ensure exactly. They try to maximise the post-tax proceeds, if you like, to the vendor by tax planning, looking for synergies and presenting those to the potential acquirer. They're looking to keep their client out of exclusivity for as long as possible till there's certainty over what that deal is going to look like.
And I think we just said buy side and sell side, and you could be on different sides for different transactions and arguing the different side of the same point the other way around, just to try and protect your client, which is your job. You've got a duty of care to them. But ultimately, I think it's to say in the vast majority of processes, they're just negotiation points where each party positions themselves in the most favourable position to them to effectively get somewhere in the middle that is a fair deal for everybody.
Indeed, ultimately, both sides need to feel that they've got a fair deal. Otherwise, there won't be a transaction.
So then, a very important point for us to justify our own existence. What's the benefit of mentioned earlier, we talked about a DIY process or just using a broker. What's the benefit of using a specialist M&A advisor to support a deal?
Well, as you say, we've touched on some of this, some of the pitfalls of not using an advisor, and you're unlikely to achieve an optimal deal if you don't have an advisor on board, because the other side are likely to have their own team already lined up. They will know where value creation and value is lost, and they'll be steering their client in the most favourable way for them. So don't put yourself at a disadvantage is probably the first message to get across there. Appointing an advisor then, it comes with experience. As I say, they'll know the pitfalls, they'll know the bits to avoid, don't grant exclusivity too early, etc. They come with a contact book. We're in the market all the time. We're doing somewhere in the region of 60 odd deals a year. We're talking to private equity, we're talking to strategic buyers. We will be able to identify much easier people that are going to be a strategic acquirer and like to pay a premium price for the business. We've mentioned time constraint. A sales process is, or any M&A transaction is time consuming. It takes management away from spending time in the business, and it's quite important during the process that they continue to hit their financial targets. So any softening, as we said, can lead to either price renegotiation, a delay in the process, or the other side withdrawing from the process altogether. Also, it's quite difficult to get people to commit fully to a process unless they feel that you are genuine and you are yourself committed. And one good way of indicating that is by appointing a professional advisor. As you say, have some skin in the game, start including some professional fees. It shows you're committed and determined to see it through.
Yeah, and that's actually comes up quite a lot, even though it's a strange point in that obviously you've come to the table, you've obviously got an incentive or a motivation to sell your business, but actually that point of putting some money down on the table is a key driver for buyers, saying, okay, they're serious here. They've invested some money, and that comes back to the point around the preparation for sale. If someone has had the foresight and invested some of the company's money for 12 months, 18 months, however long it is, in getting a business into a certain shape ahead of a deal, that shows a certain element of maturity, but also willingness to engage in the process. And from a buyer's perspective, I think takes away some of that execution risk or uncertainty around, actually, is this just going to be a bit of a horse trade and nothing's going to happen? It's all of those building blocks that provide that certainty or more certainty for a buyer.
It does. I think as well, we touched on value earlier on. People who own businesses often are very emotionally invested in that business, and sometimes that can get in the way of negotiations. So again, by having a third party handling that for you, it takes that sort of risk out of those discussions. And we also talked about vendors are increasingly staying with the business post-sale. You might want a independent third party to be leading negotiations and standing between you and the buyer, because ultimately, going forward, you're going to have to work with that buyer, and so you might want that buffer, if you like.
I think that's a really important point. Actually, there are inevitably difficult conversations, difficult negotiations in most deals where you've got people with differing views, and actually, if you've got two principals sat in the middle of those, it just increases those chances of falling out over something. Someone saying something that is taken in the wrong way, or taken in the right way, but in a bad way. Actually, that rapport and rationale between two people going forwards is hugely important, and that in itself could kill a deal, because if you no longer trust the person you're going to work with, even if value makes sense, the business, the multiple of EBITDA and what it can do going forwards makes sense, if you fundamentally don't think you can work with the person that's in there, that's a difficult one. So I think that advisor screening some of that, and ideally an advisor on the other side to filter and take some of that tension out of the process, because it is an emotionally charged event, and things can spill over quite easily. So that is a big role of the advisor, I agree. Excellent. Thank you, Philip. Thank you, Ed. And thank you, everyone, for listening to us chat through all things M&A. Goodbye.